The Democratic leader.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous, are we in a quorum?
We are.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Now, Madam President, today the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the case against the President's decision to cancel DACA, the program which grants legal status to over 600,000 Dreamers who were brought to this country through no fault of their own, who voluntarily came forward and registered with the government in exchange for protected status, who work in our factories and our hospitals, teach and learn in our schools, and serve in our military. Before the highest court in the land, President Trump and his administration cruelly argued that these Dreamers do not belong in America and must be ripped away from their families and sent back to countries that many of them do not even remember. The President once tweeted, quote, "Does anybody really want to throw out good, educated, and accomplished young people who have jobs, some serving in the military? Really?" And now he is saying, same President, that some Dreamers are, quote, very tough, hardened criminals, and his administration has argued they should be deported. Donald Trump's hypocrisy when it comes to Dreamers knows no bounds. After flip-flopping again and again and again on the issue, after failing to lead an effort to pass comprehensive immigration reform, it's objectively shameful that President Trump is trying to get the Supreme Court to do his dirty work and put the Dreamers under threat of mass deportation. When the DACA program was established in 2012, under a long tradition of administrative discretion, it changed the lives of thousands and thousands of Dreamers for the better. It made our country better. But because of President Trump and his relentless scapegoating of immigrants, his cynical use to try and tell too many of the American people that the Dreamers are the reason that they're not doing well, is despicable. These hardworking and patriotic Americans are haunted by the possibility they could be forced to leave this country at any moment, be pulled away from their families, their jobs, their homes. It's cruel, it's counterproductive, it undermines American values and all that America stands for. Thankfully, one of the first things that House Democrats did after winning the majority was to pass a permanent legislative solution for DACA recipients and TPS holders. It is legislation I wholeheartedly support. Now, it's up to the Supreme Court to defend the program. It's up to Majority Leader McConnell to bring the Dream and Promise Act to the Senate floor. My good friend, Senator Durbin, who has been a champion for Dreamers for as long as I can remember, will ask the Senate's consent to take up these bills this evening. I thank him for his moral and continued strong leadership on this issue. And I could not agree more with what he's trying to do. It's time to do the right thing for Dreamers and enshrine DACA into law. We'll see how my Republican friends respond. After all, the House has done its job. Where are the Senate Republicans who claim to stand with the Dreamers? Well, we'll see this evening. Madam President, from my home in Brooklyn, I can see that great lady in the harbor who welcomed my ancestors many years ago. If America is to remain the greatest nation in the world, a beacon of hope and freedom for people everywhere, a light among nations, we must live up to our best values. And that means we must stand totally and wholeheartedly with the Dreamers and all the 11 million who now live in the shadows. On nominations, Madam President, we're here at the beginning of another week in the Senate. As is the norm under Leader McConnell, will not be debating legislation like the DREAM Act to improve the lives of average Americans, but instead will vote on another slate of controversial Trump administration nominees. First up is the nomination of Chad Wolf to serve as an undersecretary at the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Wolf has had leadership roles within DHS through much of Trump's presidency and has troubling ties to President Trump's disaster family separation policy, the Muslim ban, and the National Emergency Declaration at the southern border. Despite testifying that he was not involved in the family separation policy, Mr. Wolf reportedly suggested the policy in a memo he sent to then Attorney General Sessions. He's ashamed to admit it. He knows it's wrong, but he did it anyway. That man does not deserve to be an undersecretary at DHS. And the circumstances of Mr. Wolf's nomination are also very strange. Wolf is not only already serving as an undersecretary in an acting capacity, President Trump has named him the incoming secretary of DHS in an acting capacity. President Trump never bothered to nominate a replacement for departing DHS Secretary McAleenan, who left yesterday. So the Senate is being asked to confirm someone to a job they're not even going to perform. Indeed, if Mr. Wolf is confirmed, we may never vote on who will be the actual Secretary of DHS, a major cabinet-level department. This is completely unacceptable. The administration is having trouble finding people to fill these jobs. They know the cruelty that they will be asked to enforce. They know that Donald Trump will treat them poorly. So we can't find anybody to take these positions. And hence we have this awkward game of musical chairs. Rather than work with Congress to find a DHS secretary that we could support, the Trump administration is trying a legal end run that subverts our constitutional duty to advise and consent. Regardless of your ideology or views on immigration, my fellow senators should oppose Wolf's nomination on constitutional grounds. And after the Senate considers Mr. Wolf, we'll consider the nomination of Stephen Menashe to serve on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. I have rarely met a nominee as low as Mr. Menashe. He has a troubling record on race, women's equality, LGBTQ rights, and the rights of immigrants. His conduct before the Judiciary Committee was insulting, and recent reports describe how during his tenure working at the Department of Education, he played a leading role in designing an illegal effort to deny debt relief to thousands of students swindled by the for-profit colleges. That's right. The Senate is going to be asked to confirm someone, Mr. Menashe, to be a judge who designed an illegal scheme to deny debt relief to defrauded students. The man has no principles. The man has no conscience. The man has no morals. He should not be on the bench. Finally, about our veterans and Agent Orange. Yesterday, our nation observed Veterans Day, a chance for all of us to say thank you to the millions of brave Americans who served our country. It's a day to not only celebrate their achievements and express a deep and abiding gratitude for their service, but also to recognize that for many veterans, the sacrifices come as a result of military service, and those sacrifices are not yet over. Today, I want to shed light on one particular issue. There are now hundreds of thousands of veterans who suffer from diseases linked to Agent Orange, a chemical used by our military during the Vietnam War. Exposure to Agent Orange can lead to a host of complications, diabetes, leukemia, and more. And the VA long provided benefits for veterans suffering from these conditions, like health care and compensation to defer the hardship they still face years after they were on the battlefield, but are suffering wounds gotten on the battlefield back then. They're suffering them now. In response to more recent studies, VA Secretary Shulkin decided in 2017 to add bladder cancer, hypertension, Parkinson-like symptoms, and hypothyroidism to the list of Agent Orange-related conditions that are eligible for benefits. That would have improved the lives of 83,000 vets. Shockingly, once again, this cruel administration, they don't even care about our veterans. It was reported that OMB Director and White House Chief Mulvaney has decided to block benefits for these new conditions because he's worried about the cost. It's disgraceful. Let me repeat. Mulvaney despite the recommendation of President Trump's VA secretary and the recommendation of the National Academy of Medicine, has decided to block health benefits to sick veterans. Many of these veterans are retired. Many don't have a steady income. These benefits could make the difference between life and death. But Mick Mulvaney, the same Mick Mulvaney who thought $1.5 trillion was an acceptable cost to give billionaires and corporations a giant tax cut, creating a huge deficit, now he believes that the cost of helping 83,000 sick veterans is just too high. This is incomprehensibly cruel. When are the American people going to wake up and see what the Trump administration is doing? Tax breaks for billionaires? No benefits for veterans who are suffering from the results of Agent Orange exposure? My home state of New York has 240,000 veterans from the Vietnam era. Many of them were exposed to Agent Orange without realizing it. Just yesterday, the Buffalo News profiled the life of Vietnam veteran Dick Gable, who was drafted into the Army at age 19. In approximately 2 years of service, he was shot in the leg, recovered, sent back to the war, losing many of his closest friends along the way. For decades, when he came home, Dick worked with kids in his hometown to make Veterans Day an annual highlight and bring together hundreds of veterans to volunteer at local schools. Just last year, he was diagnosed with leukemia, possibly because of his exposure to Agent Orange. There are likely thousands of veterans in New York like Dick, who are fighting illnesses directly linked to Agent Orange in their military service in Vietnam. But because they got the wrong disease, the Trump administration is blocking their health benefits. So today, a day after millions of Americans, myself included, marched in parades across our country to honor our vets, I demand that Chief of Staff Mulvaney reverse this cruel and unfair decision immediately. Yield the floor.